Has anybody been to our place down in Charlotte? Cool, wow, good. If you haven't been, get in touch with these folks here. We'd love to have a group down from the Ralston. We do that sort of thing all the time. We're about 350 acres, lots of different plants. I was out dashing around like mad taking pictures of our magnolias, which are completely in full bloom right now. And with this cold temperature, they're going to be nice and mushy and brown and ugly, which is a good segue into the talk tonight. And Lisa, I ramble on and on. Let's go ahead and get started. If through this journey you can't hear me, sing out. If you have a question, answer it so you don't forget near the end. Those are my only wishes and rules of engagement. And just kind of some of the things that I want to cover from a highlight standpoint. I'm going to talk about common winter injuries, what that means, what those things are, how to avoid those and or reduce injuries to your plants. Then we get into the bald is beautiful part, the stuff that I really like, the meat of the talk. We'll talk about some seasonal interest, how these plants in your landscape can provide winter interest, and some of those design traits of those plants. And I always like to end with some flavors of the month, things that I'm interested in, especially this time of the year. So does that sound like a good plan of attack? Yeah. Okay, good deal. What is winter injury? The winters that we've had of late are prime for setting up these sorts of things to the plants in our landscape. And by definition, it's used to describe different types of environmental or abiotic damage or conditions caused usually in late fall when you get that first cold snap, in winters or pseudo-winters that we've had of late, and always that ebb and flow into spring when things start to warm up and you inevitably get that cold snap around Easter. So that, by definition, is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about winter injury. And it's caused by several different things. Dramatic temperature fluctuations, obviously, that whole freeze and thaw cycle, sudden drops in the temperature, which is going on right outside the doors right now. Unusually warm midwinter temperatures, 70 degrees around December and January. I would call that unusually warm midwinter temperatures. Extended periods of really, really cold temperatures, and I honestly can't remember the last time we've endured that. And where that really affects plants is when you have that long cold stretch, plants can't pull moisture out of the ground and causes lots of damage. And I'll talk more about that in detail. Lack of snow cover, not anything that we really deal with here in the Midwest, in the Northeast. That snow provides an insulation for plants. It keeps the soil temperatures nice and even. And also, as it melts, it provides very much needed and adequate moisture. And then drying winds. They can cause a lot of damage to our broadleaf evergreens. And the extent of that damage on our plants ranges from a wide range of things, to having marginal scorching on leaves to total whole-scale deaths of plants. But you see things like this, and you can go out in the landscape and look at any number of things and see that sort of stuff going on. Where it gets kind of tricky is sometimes it's hard to tell the damage you have in your landscape, if it was caused by the winter or if it's caused by some other things. They look quite a bit alike. So it takes a little more engagement with your landscape, being out there seeing things and knowing the differences between some of the cultural things that it could be, or was it something that was caused by the crazy winters that we have. So some of the conditions that I want to talk about in more detail that can adversely affect our plants in the garden, there's frost injury, sun scald, and frost crack. Those two are very, very similar, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. Winter desiccation or drying out from winter winds. Low temperature injury, de-icing salts, and I don't think we deal with that as much as other people do. When I worked in the Philadelphia area, that was a huge issue with a lot of plants in our landscapes. And something that always kind of scares me whenever we have these cold snaps or threats of ice is damage from snow and ice on plant material. And all these kind of look a lot alike in the landscape, and I'll try to delineate the differences between those as best as I can as we kind of go along. Frost injury is the most common one. We see that early in the fall, things are growing like crazy. It's been 70 degrees through September. You get into October and things start to cool down, and then you have that first killing frost, and you can have some damage on your plant material. This type of damage on a plant, very, very common, particularly in magnolias, seeing it right now, doesn't usually kill the plant or stress it out. The plant usually recovers from this, because it's usually just foliar tissue that's going to go dormant anyway, or it's flower buds or new growth. It doesn't really stress the plant out. And plant health care can help the plant recover from that. You know, mulching correctly, having things pruned correctly, fertilizing at the right times of the year. That's what I'm talking about with plant health care. Again, late spring, early autumns, when you see this, things haven't had a chance to harden off, or they're starting to actively grow again, and then you see a lot of that kind of frost injury. Low temperature injury occurs when obviously the temperatures are fluctuating and drop and extend for a longer period of time. And you usually don't think about it, but it's the root systems of the plant that are the most susceptible to that extreme changes in low temperature. When we usually see that is in open winters, and open winters are kind of what we experience now. You have those long stretches of above average temperatures, with not a lot of rain, because plants need moisture during the winter too, and that causes things to kind of stress out. We all know this, those temperatures can kill flower buds, they can kill the new buds, the leaf buds, and even in some severe cases, you'll see some branches that can die back as a result of low temperatures. Things that are most susceptible to the low temperature injury, obviously new plants that are planted, they haven't had a chance to establish yet, and they're more prone to damage. Things that are in containers, containers that we have annuals and things in, or if you're storing some containers next to your garage or in a nursery, they're out of the ground, that root system is exposed on all sides to that fluctuation of temperatures, they're going to dry out. So things in containers are really susceptible. Shallow rooted things, magnolias tend to be kind of shallow rooted, very fleshy rooted plants, and they're susceptible. And I don't know if anybody in this room kind of pushes this envelope a little bit, but things that may or may not be hardy obviously are very susceptible to that. Getting back to the containers, and a good example of more than just foliar dieback, I had ordered a bunch of magnolias from a nursery out west 2 springs ago. Those plants came in, things had already started to leaf out. These really hadn't had a chance to really push growth yet. And we got down into the 20s, and it literally blew the bark off of about 15 brand new plants. They didn't even, usually I wait to kill things when they get out to the Arboretum, but these poor things didn't even make it out of the nursery. They had started to flow, they didn't get a chance to really establish themselves, and just that change in temperature zapped all of them, the whole entire order. Winter drying, desiccating winds, and we see this mostly in broadleaf evergreens, obviously. The wind that blows through our plants this time of the year causes those plants to give off a little bit of moisture. There's not as much moisture uptake in the ground for the plants to absorb and replace that water, and that can result in damage to leaf tissue. What you'll see with winter wind damage is browning of the foliage, which is the same as frost and cold temperatures. So there's that similarity that I was talking about. You'll have bud mortality, leaf buds will die, flower buds will die, and it's usually on that prevailing wind side of the plant, the south or the southwest portion of the plant. Highly susceptible plants, broadleaf evergreens, obviously, things that are newly transplanted, that are under a little bit of stress, haven't established themselves, and things that are in exposed locations. Common sense stuff. Horrible, horrible picture, but a really good example of that wind or leeward side getting scorched on a white pine. This was at a shopping center planting outside of Philadelphia. The whole plant is leaning in that prevailing wind. These had just been planted, and there were about 70 of these things that had been burnt like that from that desiccating wind. Hadn't had a lot of rain, no snow cover that particular winter, so no moisture for the root system to pull up and replace that desiccation. We see this all the time in conifers. a nice Alberta spruce, and that's not mite damage, that's from the wind. And here's a cryptomeria that is a little bit too orange for my taste. That thing's been completely dried out by the winter winds. It almost looks photoshopped. Frost cracks are a bit confusing to diagnose in the landscape, but this usually occurs from really quick sudden drops in temperatures. And it also can be initiated through wounds in a tree already. So a fresh pruning cut or something that's been bumped by a lawnmower and already kind of stressed out, that's where those things kind of incur and get started. Thin bark trees, red maples, zelkovas, magnolias, lindens, they're very, very susceptible, obviously. Younger plants, things that haven't, again, been established as quickly, and things that are planted in exposed sites. And what you'll see is a typical line, and the bark will kind of peel where it shouldn't. And once you see it, it's pretty obvious. Here's a cherry tree, and that's in the winter sun angle, and just from a big dip in temperature, that tissue got scorched and caused that crack. Here's a red maple, an established tree. When it was younger, that crack formed, and it slowly started to kind of heal over itself. So it's that really quick dip in temperature. We had an Easter cold snap about 4 or 5 years ago where it was in the 60s during the day, and overnight it went down to 19, and we saw this a lot on new red maples that we had planted at the Arboretum. All on the same side of the plant developed those cracks because of that really quick, rapid dip in the temperature. Here's a cross-section of the plant that we had dissected, and way back when it was very young, it experienced that crack. And you can see where the tissue had kind of grown over it. And I think this is a red maple, very adaptable tree. More of the same. That nice fissure that doesn't look natural. Here's an older one, and that cross section I think we took off of this tree right here. Sun scald is very similar. It also occurs on those thin-barked plants. It occurs in late winter or early spring when the temperature's kind of ebbing and flowing. And what happens is when it warms up, that tree starts to move fluid up into the tree to help it leaf out. The temperature will dip, and that fluid actually will freeze and cause the thin bark trees to scald or burn. Again, you see that a lot in thin bark trees, and it looks very similar to the frost cracks, but a little bit more distinct. It's not quite as deep, and it literally looks like it's been sunburned. I'd worked with a student in Philadelphia from Paige Botanic Garden, and whenever they planted trees out in the garden, they would mark the north and south side of the plant and then orient that plant from the nursery into the field like that. And I think there's something to be said for that, because some of the research that we've done on sun scald and frost cracks has that orientation been mixed up throughout the planting, and it's not something that we really pay attention to, but I think there's something to be said for that kind of ideology. Again, very similar, but causes the same type of damage to a plant. You know, this actually looks like it's been burnt. Salt injury is very, very common. You see this from more of a commercial standpoint. Most of us know to take care when we're spreading these types of chemicals around our homes. But what salt injury does to plants, it actually will dry out the tissue or the roots that come in contact with it. Sodium, as you know, is toxic to roots and plant development. So it actually poisons the plant tissue and also the soil, and ruins the structure of the soil, and it raises the pH of the soil. So those are all bad things for the development of any type of plant material. The symptoms that you see are kind of, from a lab perspective, kind of interesting. You'll have dwarf and contorted tissue, almost like herbicide damage. Chlorosis or yellowing of plant tissue is very common. The margins of the leaf sometimes will be scorched. Twig growth will be very much stunted. The foliage will be tufted and dwarfed. Sometimes you'll have a small dieback. Sometimes the whole plant will die as a result of that. Different species are sensitive to salt in different aspects. This was at Swarthmore College when I worked there. This is a yew hedge planted near a facilities building. Unfortunately, this was highly traveled by a lot of the maintenance guys that we worked with, and they would park the salt spreader and just turn it on and just blast everything within a 360-degree radius with salt. And actually, we could rake it out of this bed, and it eventually ended up killing that whole edge. So an extreme, but it shows you some of those types of damage. The burning of the leaf. You can see some chlorosis up there. It literally burnt that tissue of the plant when that salt got on the leaves of the yew. How do you reduce salt injury where you've got to put salt down from a commercial standpoint or a safety standpoint? It may not always be practical. So coming up with a better plan of maybe not planting in areas where that type of thing occurs. Use some other types of chemicals. Avoid sodium chloride or true salts. Calcium chloride works good. Urea is another good one. Plain Jane common sense. Don't blast the salt into the beds. Stand in the bed and throw it out onto the walkway or the sidewalk. Try to plant tolerant species in areas where you're going to have a high concentration of those types of chemicals. And worst case scenario, if the soil drains well, you can flush that soil with lots of water to get those salts out. So have those potential areas have better drainage.
What about sugar?
Don't know about that.
A Bartlett scientist in England studied feeding plants with sugar water, and that would get into the tissues and ward off the ingress of salt.
Yeah.
So he did that on roadsides, and it's pretty effective.
Huh. Glenn Percival is our scientist there.
Yeah.
Other chemicals, calcium magnesium acetate is what you see them putting on the roads before storms come through. They are less likely to damage plants. Lime and vinegar will work to a degree, but some common sense is the best approach with that sort of stuff. Some tips and tricks on protecting plants in the landscape from winter injury. Common sense, basic stuff. It all starts with plant selection. Planting good quality, healthy plants to begin with so that you're not planting something that's already stressed out that may become more susceptible. Choosing species that are hardy to your growing area so you're not pushing that envelope of things getting damaged. And plant according to your site. Don't plant things out in exposed areas that can't take that type of situation. Knowing your hardiness zone, very, very important. We're zone 7B down in Charlotte. And you could argue that in different parts of our property. There's always microclimates, but trying to live within that realm. And I know it's hard, but getting out in your landscape and looking for cultural issues and inspecting plants, looking for structural problems in trees and shrubs that may kind of split apart, and making sure your landscape is healthy as you go into a winter. Pruning is very important to avoid damage during snows and ice storms. Taking out dead wood, limiting really extreme crotches that may split apart, branches that are overextended and may fall apart, looking for defects in big trees so that an ice storm doesn't come along and that tree decides to let loose and fall on your house during an ice storm or a snowstorm. And if you've got trees with issues like that might need to be guided or cabled, getting somebody to come out and help you with that sort of thing is important. Things that we've all seen in the wintertime. A tree that had a defect in it, and with that extra weight from the snow and ice, it just decided to let loose. I can't tell you how many heartbreaks of this I've experienced throughout my career of conifers just kind of falling apart. It's hard to protect great big plants. We've done some stuff with deer netting to wrap around them so that they don't fall apart. And when the snow does get on them, they stay kind of tight. And not much that we can do to avoid some of this stuff. But structural pruning, looking after trees from an early stage on into their maturity, will help eliminate some of those types of issues. We see a lot of damage from plants because of fertilizing at the wrong time of the year. People putting out too much fertilizer in the fall, and things really push a lot of new growth, and that new growth gets damaged. So timing is very important when you're fertilizing so that you don't incur those types of problems. Most important aspect culturally to manage your landscape is going into winter, ensuring that things have gotten enough water and that you have a way to water plants if you go into a dry spell during the winter. Very, very important. Nothing will kill a plant quicker than this, particularly in the winter time. Some physical barriers that will help keep your plants a little bit protected during the winter time. We've all used Rime fabric. You can get it at any hardware store. This time of the year, we've got a lot of young plants in my nursery, so we keep big piles of this around and we cover stuff up and uncover stuff up. But I'd rather do that to protect young plants than things get whacked by the cold. Very easy to maneuver and does the bare minimum in helping protect plant material. And then you can get real crazy and creative with stuff. The luxurious, beautiful blue tarp. A temporary fix if you're going to have a cold temperature and you've got something tender in a container or a bed of something to cover it up and take it off because you don't want to keep the light from plants. I love this idea to protect new things in a vegetable garden or herb garden, just to protect those young shoots from that errant last-ditch effort by Mother Nature to kill all the stuff that you work hard for. And I always like to walk through my neighborhood at this time of the year, and neighbors get very creative. If I've got somebody that's already planted, I don't know where they got them from, marigolds around their mailbox, and they got the bed sheets out, I'm sure, tonight. So temporary things that can help to a degree. You see a lot of this in the Northeast and in other places, the burlap wrap. We do this on occasion for young plantings, just because there's that last cold snap. But for me personally, I don't think it's worth it to go through every winter and have to do that to plants. If it's that hard to keep something alive, it's time to try something else. And I hate the way that looks. I hate going by a house and everything's covered up with that horrible burlap. It's good in a pinch or something's young that's getting established. I get that. This is something we did some research on a couple of years ago. It's called the shrub coat. And there's little poles, almost like a teepee in here. And I actually took one of those home for my stepdaughter. We had a great big one, and we cut a hole in it and had hours of fun inside of that thing. That's about the most use that they got for us. We didn't do a whole lot with them. It's the same thing as burlap. I don't want to look through the garden and see a bunch of these tents everywhere. This was a Bucklandia that we had planted. It was a tiny little thing, and it got blasted anyway. But we wanted to try them to see how they would work out. Your imagination can go wild with this sort of thing. This was at Wisley Garden, and I'm sure it's a tropical. We did this at Stowe with the bananas to protect them. Put a basket around it, stuff it full of straw or leaves, and cover that stalk so that water doesn't go down. It just looked kind of cool, and I was happy to take lots of pictures of that. This is when you get a little bit too carried away with protecting things, but one of my favorite mantras is always put the oxygen on yourself, oxygen mask on yourself first, and this falls into that vein. There's a lot of research that we're doing now on anti-transparents. When I was in college, this was the save-all for winter plants, for boxwoods, for yews, or whatever. But there's not a lot of research out there that supports that. Most of the hard science that's been done on this shows that they provide zero to no benefit to plants. Working with a bunch of scientists and PhDs, I've become very skeptical, and we're respectively skeptical on this. And we want to boil this down and see, all right, does it work? Does it not work? Are there some other things that we can do? You mentioned the sugar. There's lots of things that we're looking at to see if we can help plants that might be a little bit stressed out, haven't quite been established yet. This is a garden colleague of ours at the University of Washington State University, Lincoln Scott, She's got a great website called Horticultural Myths. She's done a lot of research on these things, and she says point blank they don't do anything. We want to dig a little deeper and see what they do, as well as some other things. You know, bottom line, and this is what I tell people, you can't change plant genetics. You can't change the hardiness of a plant. You can put something in a microclimate, you can wrap it up in burlap every year, maybe, but you can't change the genetics of that plant. Something that's cold hardy is cold hardy. Something that isn't. And you can't really change that. So, you know, the most important thing I tell people is pick the right plant for the right place. But the jury's still out on the anti-desiccants. Stay tuned for that one. All right, this is the bald is beautiful part. This is the part that I really like. You know, the landscape in the wintertime has always been talked about as being barren and devoid of any interest. But for me, it's one of the best times to walk through a garden and see the structure of things and really look to the nth degree to find that interest in the things that catch your eye. And the structure of plants to me has always been a fascinating aspect. And for me, I like plants that look good winter, spring, summer, fall. So that ties into it also. So I always like to start with the 3 Bs, berries, bark, and buds. So plants that produce some type of a fruiting structure, I lump into my berry category. So deciduous hollies, and hollies in general, they've got that nice fruit that look good this time of the year, and the added benefit of that is the birds absolutely love it. Crab apples, we've got a big crab apple collection at our Arboretum. This is one called Golden Raindrops, and that's pretty. I like the stamens that are holding the fruit up. It's all very, very colorful, and the birds like these also. I think this is the first winter that I've noticed there's absolutely no crab apples in our crab apple collection. The birds have gotten them all. Horrible, invasive, I know, but that's pretty to me. That dark purple color on the ligustrum. Rose hips, everybody's crazy about the flowers. I love the rose hips. This is one called Chuckles that we have in our garden. It's one that I've had a hard time trying to track down, but it's a really, really nice kind of a landscape shrub rose. There's also some roses, and I don't have pictures, that have really pretty thorns in the wintertime. Sumac, the seed pods on that are beautiful in the winter. Clethra and some crepe myrtles. They're seeds. They fall in that berry category for me. The tulip poplar. I love the samaras on maples. They add a lot of winter interest. They don't stick around long, but they provide a season of interest on plants. Thank you. That's my Martha Stewart picture. I got another Martha Stewart picture. I think they're pretty. My Scottish Terrier gets them caught in her hair all the time and hates them, but I think they're pretty. Here's my other Martha Stewart picture. Mock orange. Cyanojackii, at very extreme close-up. We've got several of these planted in our shrub gardens. Absolutely love this tree, this shrub. And even the cones that are forming on conifers, I think, are pretty in the wintertime. And getting into the bark interest, there's all kinds of plants that are out there that provide this type of interest. This is a lace bark pine at Swarthmore College. It's got Arboretum. The nice character of a beech tree. I think this is taken here. Stewardia on the right. So many different textures and colors that provide that really pretty interest in the wintertime. Pines and black gum. And then I lump in the twig color of plants into my bark category. Sengukaku, I think this Japanese maple. the yellow twig dogwoods. Love this deciduous winter twig dogwood. The buds of plants add a lot of interest in the wintertime. Most of these are open right now. And even the candles of the pines. And of course, things that flower in the wintertime, or witch hazels are going absolutely bonkers right now. And they also provide fragrance, which is nice in the wintertime. Camellias, of course. Two of these planted in our garden that are blooming right now that you can smell from a mile away. Just a beautiful Venicera. Not that aggressive. One of my favorite plants. Marcescens, this is your word for the day. I learned this way back when in college. Doug told me when I was at Daniel Stowe that brown is the color in the garden, and it was revelatory to me. And I absolutely love the leaves of these oak trees because marcescens is when a plant holds on to its leaves for an extended period of time. Witch hazels will do that quite a bit. Beech trees will do that. A lot of oaks will do that. I like the color. I like the way they move in the wind. They make a lot of noise when they rustle together. We've got some Japanese emperor oaks planted next to our lab out in the back. And today they were making so much racket. It was beautiful. And this is that tree right here, Japanese emperor oak. We were involved with the World Trade Center trees. These are swamp white oaks, and just a beautiful post-fall color on those things. And you can prune for winter interest. This is a paradome that we planted many years ago. That looks good when it's got the leaves on it, when it flowers, but that structure is really interesting this time of the year. Espaliers add a lot of winter interest. I think this is at Kew Gardens. They planted these beeches and they pruned them back into these little globes and pollarded them. And really, really pretty in the summer, pretty in the fall, and when the leaves would upsize, they're really pretty in late winter too. So some flavors of the month, some things that I like that are kind of looking good right now. I could talk for hours on this, but I would hope that y'all would like to go home at some point tonight. So I really curbed myself and held back on these. We're programmed to look for conifers in the wintertime, and there's a lot of really, really good ones out there. And what draws my interest in the winter are things that are kind of unusual, things that have yellow foliage, things that have blue foliage, things that have different forms and different shapes. And we really tried to highlight that stuff in our conifer garden at the Arboretum.
What are those?
This is an Atlas cedar, I forget the cultivar, and this is a Scotch pine called Gold Coin. And of course the snow really makes those colors really kind of pop. One of my favorite plants on the planet, this is a bald cypress called Cascade Falls. And this plant actually is now over this sidewalk and moving its way down. But it looks great in the summer. In the fall, it has that bronze needle color, but here it is its neighbor across from it in the wintertime. Just that beautiful moppy texture. We can grow lots of pines, but I like to promote this one. This is a limber pine, Pinus flexulis, Vanderwolf's pyramid, a nice kind of glaucous blue color, and keeps kind of a pyramidal shape as it develops, but a really, really pretty conifer with a nice soft texture to it. Delving into some other broadleaf evergreens, nobody uses Ilex opaca anymore, and this is one called Cronenberg that I like a lot. It's a little more sparse than some of the Ilex opaca cultivars, and it has kind of sweeping branches on the end, and a really, really good, nice red berry set, but one of my favorite Ilex opacas. This plant can take shade, can take wet soil, can take dry soil, very underutilized, I think, in landscapes today. Excuse me. Probably my favorite magnolia. This is a sweet bay called Santa Rosa. I think this was a Bob McCartney introduction from Woodlanders. I think it's the most evergreen one out there. It keeps that nice green color. throughout the growing season. I fell in love with this plant wholeheartedly when I was at Daniel Stowe. We used a lot of them there, but it's another one of those plants that in the wind it'll move, and you get that really pretty white underside of the leaf that shows up. Flowers late spring, early summer, very nice lemon scented flower, but a really nice texture to it and color in the wintertime. And it'll keep that nice green color, it doesn't bronze out. A newish one to the trade, one called Sweet Thing, or I think Percy Paige is its trademark name. It's more of a rounded form, and one I'd like to try as a hedge, but you get all those things that you get with the sweet bay. So you get that really nice flower and that silver underside of the leaf when it kind of moves in the wind. It's a really nice plant, very adaptable. More rose hips. This was the rose garden at Sophomore College. This is just plain old Rosa virginiana, a nice single bloomer, but really, really pretty rose hips that persist through the wintertime. One of my favorite red buds, a little woody, and the reason it's not the best flower, but I like that really coarse leaf to it, which I think lends it to be a little more drought tolerant, but it has really nice texture in the wintertime. Very, very stiff, very, very coarse, next to a weeper right here, but I love the coarse texture of that in the wintertime. Here's Traveler, a good weeping red bud. Beautiful in the wintertime. Acer capillipes, the Asian counterpart to our striped bark. This scratches all those itches for me. It looks good winter, spring, summer, fall. Some of the best fall color out there. It's absolutely electric, but the bark is really, really pretty in the wintertime. Can take dry shade, works well in understories. Here's a close-up of the bark. Really, really pretty. And right before it starts to break bud, the colors kind of really amp up as it starts to pump fluids up through the plant. Another one, I think this one is white tigress. I can't remember. This was at Swarthmore College, but really, really pretty in the wintertime. The reds and the whites all at the same time. I'm a sucker for anything that grows upright or is fastigiate. It suits well for landscape plants. They don't take up a lot of space, so you can put them in a lot of landscape and urban situations. And this is our friend, Slender Silhouette. It's a sweet gum cultivar. It does produce the fruit, but they don't go very far because it have branches that go out. And every once in a while, it'll throw off a branch like that, but it stays really, really nice and tight like that. Just a nice texture in the winter garden. Regal Prince. This is a cross between swamp white oak, bicolor, and English oak, Quercus robur. So you get the best of both worlds out of that. You get the urban adaptability of the swamp white oak, and you get that fastigiate growth of the English oak. And this is a really, really good urban oak. For an oak, it grows pretty quickly. Great fall color, nice summer interest, and really pretty texture in the wintertime. Kind of hard to tell from this picture, but it has really nice kind of peely bark, similar to the swamp white oak. Just a really nice plant. Beating that dead horse of a fastigiate tree, I can't help it. I really like that form. This is a tulip poplar called Arnold. My favorite characteristic of it is this really nice fall color, but I love that nice texture, that upright growth that it performs in the landscape, and looks really, really good in the wintertime. This is a pomegranate cultivar called Purple Sunset. It's planted right next to our espaliers. Right behind it is a hornbeam arch. That's one of the highlights of our arboretum. But when this thing has fruit on it, everybody stops in their tracks and is instantly drawn to it. It looks like a Christmas ornaments all over it. You get the best of all worlds with a pomegranate. Pomegranates can kind of fall apart as they get older. This plant stays kind of tight, doesn't get really, really big. You get a nice, pretty flower on it, and this really nice fruit that persists into the wintertime as long as the birds don't eat it. But adds a lot of interest to the landscape. I really like this plant this time of the year. Midwinter fire, probably my favorite of the colored stemmed dogwoods. The pictures really don't do it justice. This is a plant that, if you keep it the growth small and young, if you prune out the bigger pieces, which was done here, that younger new growth has a much vibrant, brighter color. And it's a plant that every 2 to 3 years you can do that to, and it will rejuvenate itself, and you get this nice, really attractive winter interest. And it's a plant that really, really lights up the landscape this time of the year. One of my favorites. I think this is at the Biltmore Street. Whoa, I've blown through the whole thing. Lots of witch hazels right now. This is one called Orange Peel that I like a lot. Very, very fragrant. If you find yourselves down Charlotte Way and would like to visit or are thinking about that, this is my email. Give me a shout and do our best to get you to come down and visit. If I've stimulated your brains remotely and you think of a question in the middle of the night, send me an email and I'll get back to you on that sort of thing. But thank you for staying awake on a Thursday. I heard there's a big basketball game tonight or something too. Duke and Carolina. Any questions?
Any questions for Greg?
Yes, sir.
About Sunscald, we were in Berlin last summer, and all their new trees, they paint the trunks white. You've seen that all over the world. It's really rare here, and it seems to work against Sunscald. What are your thoughts on that?
You see it in Florida, you see it in Arizona. They do it on citrus trees quite a bit. It's not something I'd want to see people doing here on a large scale. I think it provides some degree of protection, but it's more of a prophylactic kind of a thing. It's one of those things that people feel better about doing that sort of thing. Whether or not it really helps a lot, I'm not 100% sure. I know they do it on orange trees in areas where they grow a lot of oranges and paint the whole trunks. You know, for us, when that's an issue, it's the winter time. The sun's lower in the sky, it hits the trunks in certain angles, and that's when it can be a problem. I'm not
What
really
else can you do to prevent Sunscald?
You know, some of the wraps will work for several years. I see it more of an issue on plants that are already kind of stressed out. Urban trees that may or may not be the best quality going in. Parking lot plants, things that are planted too deep, things that have big mulch volcanoes over it, things that may have had too much pruned off of it before they really had a chance to establish themselves. And it's that thing of putting the right plant in the right place. You know, don't put a honey locust that has that thin bark in an area where it's going to be exposed and get that kind of scalding on it.
I also like that upfront. Where can you get the tulip poplar?
Arnold, I know Hawks Ridge Nursery sold those. That's where I got most of mine. I would check there. Piedmont, Carolina, maybe. Those types of places. If you asked around at some nurseries, they could probably get it. I wonder if even community forests might be able to track that down. But it's not something that's uncommon. I know a lot of the bare root liner growers, almost all of them carry it, so nurserymen can get those plants. If I can find them, they can find them. Anybody else? All right. Thanks, y'all.